All right. Today we're talking about emotions, what they are, what they're not, and how to listen to them to live a better life and follow your emotional guidance system properly. Okay. So, first, we start off with what emotions are not. So, they're not just, in particular, not just neurochemical events. They are correlated with neurochemical events or the brain's activities. And they're also not just a survival signal, only an evolution. So, evolutionary theory, modern psychology will say, oh, well, emotions are just neurochemical patterns, happenings in the brain. Evolutionary theorists will say, oh, it's just for survival. It's part of our evolutionary progression. But what we need to understand is this is just the mechanism that we can observe here, but it doesn't describe the feeling or what emotions truly are. It's just talking about the functions and how emotions may be applicable to our material life, but not necessarily our spiritual life. Okay? So, emotions, what they actually are, is how your mind, body, soul signals your alignment or misalignment with source. There are no wrong feelings, only wrong interpretations of the source of that feeling. Internal, external. So you can have internal triggers going on or things where you think, oh, I know the source of this emotion, but that is just a belief. Beliefs can be wrong. You could also believe that there is an external source. Well, the source is always going to be internal because an emotion comes from inside. Externally, you have triggers, which we'll get into later. But thinking of it in this way of like, okay, the emotion has information in it. It has substance to it. It is real. And it is rooted in something real, whether it's in this lifetime or another, or in your autobiographical life, or your ancestors' autobiographical life, or even rooted in a memory in this life that you can't remember, right? Every emotion that is triggered from some external event or some thought, so the internal state, does have a true source, right? It's rooted in something real. So emotions are not just illusions or you're being delusional or you're wrong. No, your emotions are telling you something real every single time. It's the interpretations of where that emotion is actually rooted or coming from. That is where the error can come from. That is where the distortion can come from. All emotions, feelings have an internal source that is real. Like I just said, the narrative thoughts about feelings can be the error. External events trigger emotional states. They resonate with the internal emotional architecture, but they are not the direct source of that external or of that internal emotional sensation, that subjective experience, even though it may feel like it so vividly that the thing that happened outside of me is the pure cause of my emotional state. This can be debunked by just simply using a thought experiment of the same event can have different emotional responses depending on the person, or just even depending on the situation or the context. If emotions were sourced in external events, that means the same external events would always lead to the same emotions, and that is not the case. There are even times where the same event can happen to the same person at different times, and the emotional response is different. Like, say, a breakup. First time you get broken up with, or you go through a breakup, it's devastating. The second time, maybe there's a little bit more emotional regulation, there's a little bit more meaning, or it can even be the opposite, depending on how much you were attached to that person, just to give an example. Okay? So while external events can trigger and modulate your emotional state, they are never going to be the actual source. That will always be internal or somewhere rooted in the past, whether again in this lifetime, past life, or an ancestral line, or a memory that you cannot remember in your shadow, in the subconscious. Positive emotions like bliss, joy, peace, love, reason, these are the default of existence, which I know sounds crazy, but just bear with me, okay? The default state of existence, because it's unity, the unity of source, of creation, of the universe, of God, is unity, unified. And so that's what the positive emotions are coming from. That's what they feel like. Moving towards unity, connection, alignment with source, with yourself, with your dharma, with your nature, and source will lead to positive emotions. Positive emotions are positive reinforcement. They're saying you're going in the right direction, you're doing a good job. Patting patting yourself on the back, essentially, right? Move towards that direction you've been going in. That's what positive emotions do. Okay? Negative emotions are going to be the opposite. So negative emotions like anger, shame, guilt, fear, grief, there are many more positive and negative emotions. I don't want to list every single emotion, but you get the point, you get the vibe, right? These are privations of positive emotions, hot, cold. So think of it like positive emotions are the positive content, they're the default. Just like hot, heat is the default for temperature. Cold is just less heat. You don't add more cold particles, you slow the particle movement down. Negative emotions are not an ontologically, fundamentally new thing. They are just in privation, the constrained lesser version of the positive emotions. Okay? So it's the same thing at different degrees. And when a positive emotion becomes a negative emotion, depends on the individual. There's no hard, direct, fundamental line. There's no point where you can definitively say, this is when happiness turns to sadness. Just like there's no definitive point where you can say, this is when hot becomes cold. It depends on the context. It depends on the subjective observer or experiencer. Okay? Moving away from unity, alignment, towards separation is when you'll feel negative emotions. Error message, something needs to be realigned. So it's your soul, your body, your higher self, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, is signaling to you that, hey, you're going in the wrong direction or something is misaligned, whether externally or internally, okay? And it's always going to be both because the internal is a reflection of the external. So you can find it externally and also internally. Obviously, like I said, the true source is always going to be rooted internally, but you can work on it externally. It doesn't mean that you should just negate your external circumstances like you're just meditating through, abuse or violence or destruction or, a negative environment, right? No, change your environment or work with whatever is triggering that negative emotion to get into a balanced state to then locate what that negative circumstance was triggering inside of you, okay? It's a two-way street. It's not monolithic. It's not just uniform one thing. So now we have the emotional guidance system. So you have chronic negative emotions is alerting you that something is misaligned internally, externally, consistently, and you haven't gotten to the source if it's chronic, if it's repeatedly happening over and over again. Different than acute negative emotions, which are functional and adaptive and normal and totally fine. Negative emotions are just saying, hey, it's an error message, right? It's like a fire alarm. If there's a fire, you want the fire alarm to go off. That's fine. But if the fire alarm is firing even when there's not a fire there, it's constantly sensing smoke even when there's no smoke there, well, that means then there needs to be an understanding of why that fire alarm is firing all the time. But in this case, there's always a fire. It's just that fire might not be rooted in the present moment. It might be rooted in the past. Okay? Mind, body, soul misalignment. Modern society has trained us to numb, ignore, suppress our emotional states. And another thing you need to remember is that emotion is energy in motion. Think of the law of conservation. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. So if you have a negative emotion in a moment, you go through a trauma, right? It's going to trigger negative emotions. If you can't process all of that negative emotions because of the trauma, usually it's nearly impossible as children, right? Everyone grows up with some level of trauma. You don't process all of that negative emotions, and that does not go somewhere else. That stays in your system, and it manifests itself externally and internally, whether in the body or in the external environment or through your thoughts or through your emotional states over and over again until it's processed. It's like a reminder, okay? It's almost like a seatbelt warning. Like you're not wearing your seatbelt. It's going to constantly keep reminding you until you put on your seatbelt or access the source of that negative emotion. Again, chronic negative emotion, not acute, which is different. The mind body are two sides of the same coin. Chronic negative emotions will manifest downstream into the body or the external environment as chronic physical symptoms or similar events happening over and over again that are negative, right? That you're like, why does this keep happening? Why do I keep manifesting the same situations that I don't like? Well, there's some trauma going on there that's attracting or manifesting or selecting the same events over and over again until it gets dealt with. This is a key concept in shadow work or inner work. Emotional health, physical health, mental health are all one pattern, meaning the mind, body, spirit, mind, body, soul are all one thing at different levels of constraint. There's no true ontological fundamental boundary where the mind, soul starts. It's all the same thing, just manifests in different ways. Just like ice Water and vapor are all water at different levels of constraint. Mind, body, soul, same thing. Health, what we call healthy, is what is sustainable and coherent. Illness is incongruent and self-destructive. So illness is destructive of the median of the body, of the mind, body, spirit, contradictory. Health is sustainable and congruent. It's coherent. There's the alignment. Think of it like illness would be when you're listening to music and somebody sings off key and you're like, you got that. You're like, ugh. You hear that noise where they and you're like, hate that. That's illness. That's because it's not disharmonious. But when someone sings beautifully, right? That was a little opera-ish. Sorry, that was kind of cringe, but you get the point, right? It's harmonious. It's on key. It's on beats. It feels right. That's health. Acute negative emotions are perfectly normal, okay? Chronic equals unprocessed internal energy that must be transformed. As I said before, energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Institutional patterns. So this is, again, modern society, Western medicine and psychology and all that good stuff. The go-to is usually medication, surface level techniques, talk therapy, distractions, external remedies. Not saying that these cannot be somewhat helpful temporarily, just like if you break your leg and you have a crutch, you need crutches to walk around, fair enough, temporarily, but they're using that to treat it forever. And that's why there's no cures for any of the DSM-5 disorders, because of that surface level approach. When you need to go deeper to really heal the mind, body, spirit, and to follow your emotions properly, to understand what you're actually being told through your emotional states. We're gonna do a little breakdown then, okay? Less is more in healing your emotions and listening to your emotional guidance system, meaning that the emotional guidance system is constantly giving you information all the time. Emotions are constantly present, whether positive or negative. But it's difficult to hear them because we're so distracted, because we don't know how to focus. We also don't know how to follow our emotional guidance system. But most importantly, because we have a bunch of traumatized, suppressed, blocked parts that are in the way of our emotional guidance system. And more importantly, the positive emotions, which lie underneath as the default, are negative emotional states and our emotional energetic blockages. So you have energetic blocks equals stored emotional pattern loop that was not processed when it happened. This is what trauma is. I said before. So then you have inner work, shadow work, meditation, yoga, journaling, nature, exercise, diet, sobriety, therapy, right? These things do work, right? I'm not saying talk therapy is useless, but things like somatic release, good sleep, plant medicines even. But yeah, sobriety, exercise, especially yoga, meditation, shadow work, inner work, these are the most important because it's looking inside of yourself, right? Looking inside of yourself to really see what the fuck's going on and why are you feeling negatively in this moment or that moment or continuously, okay? Find the true cause. And if something externally triggers a negative emotion, an acute negative emotion, and you're able to process it in the moment through being present to that feeling, then it dissipates and it dissolves. One thing to clarify too as well is pleasure is not positive emotion. Pleasure is desire. That is a negative emotion. Desire is negative because it is rooted in lack and separation. Like I said before, positive emotions are rooted in connection, unity, congruence. Something like pleasure might feel good temporarily, but it's more of a physical sensation. And physical sensations are not necessarily the same as emotional sensations. Obviously, they're the same pattern at different constraints, but the emotional state is more fundamental because you can have physical pain and feel great. You can have physical pleasure and feel awful. Addiction is a perfect example of this. It's the most fundamental aspect of this pleasure problem because people will think, oh, I want to feel good, not feel positive emotions. Feeling good is not the same as positive emotions because positive emotions are positive reinforcement. Addiction degrades the body and numbs the pleasure response. You need more stimulus. It's not sustainable. You do the same amount of something that you're addicted to, and you need more and more. It needs to be more visceral. It needs to be more, let's say, plentiful, right? You need the bigger and bigger hit. This is how addiction works. Food, drugs, social media, sex, relationships, whatever it is, attention, validation, that pleasure that you receive, it's the highs and lows, ups and downs. It's not positive. That's negative. If it makes you feel worse afterwards, it's not a positive thing. It is a negative thing, masquerading as a positive thing, hijacking the pleasure system in the brain. So you go through the highs and lows, unsustainable, as I said. All addictions are unsustainable. They degrade the body, they degrade the feedback loop itself, meaning you always need that higher and higher hit. It is the sustainable self-propagating things that is positive. And one thing you want to always ask yourself is this sustainable? And is this self-propagating? Meaning, does this allow me to do this more in a healthy, sustainable way? Don't follow pleasure or impulse, please. Don't conflate it with positive emotions, because most people do. The feeling should not be positive or not be pleasurable, but measured, natural. I miswrote here. So listen to the body as well. Listening to the body. And that's what the key is, right? Less is more, meaning getting the gunk and the blocks out of the way through these practices that I mentioned. And I also have a transformation guide down below, which will give you a step-by-step process to get in touch with your emotions. So if you want to get that, I kind of lay it out for you, structured. If you don't have your own plan, you get that down in the description, okay? But that's the key to understand. And while you're doing this process of sitting with these emotions that have been blocked, these negative emotions that have been in this pattern, this loop for God knows how long, maybe even lifetimes actually, you want to bring awareness, but then also acceptance, because awareness and acceptance is the universal solvent for all emotions, but specifically what we're talking about is negative emotions, because underneath those negative emotions is the default, which is positive emotions, which might sound surprising again, because we live on Earth where there's so much chaos and everything's going crazy right now, especially in the world in 2026. But believe it or not, most of the universe is congruent and aligned. It's only the incongruent parts, the triggering parts that we notice and remember, because that is reminding us that, hey, there's more work to be done to align our emotional states with source, God, universe, higher self, nature, whatever you want to call it. Okay? Thank you for your time. Cheers.